Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Everybody good? And Dr. Clay, you're with us? Excellent. So the time is 9:05 a.m. and the meeting of the A/F Appeals Committee is called to order. We will now call the roll. Member Meyerson? Here. Dr. Hagerman?
Here.
Dr. Clay?
Here.
The committee has a quorum. These board members represent all members of the committee as appointed by the board. Could everyone else please identify themselves, starting with the board staff?
Hi, I'm Sean Ross. I'm the Executive Director of the Arizona State Board of Education.
Aaron Wonders, Deputy Director of State Board of Education.
Shannon Etz, Project Director of Constituent Services, State Board of Education.
And Jessica Mueller, Research and Data Analyst for the State Board of Education. And then if the Department of Education staff could please introduce themselves.
This is Audra Amata, Deputy Associate Superintendent of Assessment.
John Smith, Chief Accountability Officer.
My name is Jason Fahmy. I'm the Director of Accountability.
And then we have a staff member for the board taking minutes for this meeting as well. It is noted that this meeting is conducted over hybrid access with persons in Phoenix as well as over Zoom, and the meeting is being live streamed over YouTube. Meeting is also being recorded. Thank you all for being here today. So at the previous meeting of the A/F Appeals Committee on November 20th, I provided a general background on the A/F letter grade appeals process. At that meeting, the committee voted on recommendations to the board for 30 schools appealing their A/F letter grade. To avoid repetition, I'll simply ask if any of the members have any questions.
I
Mhm.
do.
Yes.
Well, when do I go ahead and if I have an issue with one of them, when is the time that I let you know that?
Absolutely, Dr. Clay. Thanks for asking. There will be a moment that I'll ask for schools that you want to remove from the consent agenda to have discussion. So thank you. So hearing no other comments or questions, today's agenda includes 20 schools appealing their A/F letter grade. The committee will vote on recommendations for the board to consider for the letter grade appeal applications received for the 22-23 school year. The schedule for today includes expedited appeals, information including application materials about schools submitting an appeal application on today's agenda is provided in your executive summary sheet. This is also public information on Simbly. Today's items will mostly be taken as a consent agenda. The draft recommendations are listed on the agenda item. There is one school who has appeared today, Julia Randall Elementary School, and the committee has decided to grant the school 5 minutes to present a data-driven analysis of the grounds for the appeal. This will be the time that I'll ask Julia Randall Elementary School representative to approach the podium and provide any comment or have a discussion with the committee members as the committee members choose. Thank you so much for being here.
Good morning, members of the... There we go. Good morning, members of the board and those present here today. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to Julia Randall Elementary School's letter grade. Currently, we have been assigned the letter grade of a C with a 1.38 points away from a B. It's very important that as I discuss this with you this morning, that I point out to you that Julia Randall is in assisted targeted school improvement on the federal plan, but we have gained 10.86 points in improvement in that. And this appeal does refer to two specific issues with students with disabilities. And so I'd like to just highlight very quickly some data that goes along with our appeal. While the first appeal based on incorrect data only affects one student, when taken in collaboration with all the other points, I'm sure you'll be able to see that we have grounds for this appeal. I want to specifically go to the issue of weather in Payson, Arizona. Payson is at 5,000 feet elevation. Our community gets snow and rain, but last year had a particularly difficult year with precipitation. So approximately 18 days were missed by up to 50 of our students, about 10% of our population. 18 days constitutes a month and 2 days of instruction on our 4-day academic school week. So we had students who missed as much as a month. Now, while we have a one-to-one computer system that supports our students, we don't send our computers home with our elementary age students every day. And in addition, we have areas in our school district where we get no Wi-Fi signal, even with Wi-Fi boosters, specifically in the Geisela area and in some places on the rim in our school district. Knowing this, that up to 50 students could have missed as much as a month of instruction on weather constitutes an event in our community that could have very well affected our overall letter grade. I also want to speak to the issue with our special education students. When you have the appeal before you, you see that we have areas where we had 4 teachers over a 2-year period in our self-contained learning classroom. It affected 3 students who should have been placed on the alternative assessment. Those students' scores on the AASA were either minimally proficient, a 1, or no valid attempt. Had they been on the correct assessment, we would have got a much better picture of those students as learners, and it would have positively affected Julia Randall's overall grade. When we discussed the concerns with our specialized learning center and having 4 different teachers in a 1-year period, we're talking about 9 students who are affected by the loss of teachers over 2 years, especially just before the 2023 assessment calendar, when we lost the teacher in that classroom. I know as educators, you all know the importance of having a consistent learning environment, especially for students who are at such high need. Finally, unfortunately, we had an instructional coach who took care of our assessment and did not provide accommodations for 13 students during our window. And so we have a grand total of somewhere near 70 students who were affected in some way on assessment scores. We truly believe that those 70 students, had they been carefully monitored, had they been given the accommodations they need, had a teacher been there continuing to support and engage those students, the letter grade would have been significantly different for Julia Randall Elementary School. And as I said, we only are 1.38 points away from a B. We believe with these factors taken into consideration that would be a legitimate score for our school. May I answer any questions for anyone? Okay. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you so much. In addition, there are appeal applications that are pending information that is not currently available from ADE or the assessment vendor. That would be Ostravo Online Academy, entity ID 91184 and entity ID 91246. Desert Cove Elementary, Desert Shadows Elementary, Ellsworth Elementary, Larkspur Elementary, and Palomino Intermediate. Most of these schools are listed with a draft recommendation pending the evaluation of the information outstanding. In the future, there'll be an opportunity to table these recommendations for a later ADF Appeals Committee. However, there are a few of those appeals that were pending information that was received that we'll now report to the committee this meeting. Pending information was received for Monument Valley High School that impacts the recommendation. ADE, Accountability and Research, found that Appeal Factor 2 does have an impact on the school's overall letter grade. This is an adverse testing condition that occurred where the population of EL students that was being tested on ACT ELA had to be sent home due to a snowstorm on that day. And this was the final day of the testing window. Due to the school having 2 appeal factors, however, it is recommended that the committee wait to make an motion in case the other appeal factor recommendation might change as well. Any questions about Monument Valley and the update regarding the second appeal factor? And hear none. Thank you. Pending information was also received related to Ellsworth Elementary School and Skyview School. For Skyview School, this is the school's only appeal factor. ADE, in discussion from Accountability and Research, Exceptional Student Services, and School Finance, found that accepting the corrected data for special education inclusion would not impact the funding, and the school would not be required to submit a 15915 correction for prior year data. The draft recommendation would drop the pending and retain the recommend approval to the B overall letter grade based on incorrect data related to special education inclusion. For Ellsworth Elementary, the school has another appeal factor that needs further evaluation. At this time, I'd like to answer any questions about the update for these schools. I know Sean Smith also had more in-depth discussion as well with Exceptional Student Services regarding this data. If you have any questions.
So I have a question about Monument Valley.
Yes, please, Dr. Hagerman.
So just talk it through. When I looked at it, it looked like the changes don't result in a letter grade change, or am I missing something in the data?
Yes, that was one where the department needed to run the analysis on that second appeal factor. With that second appeal factor, the department ran it so that about half of those EL students obtaining proficiency on ACT ELA would have that impact of improving the letter grade to that next point. That update was just provided this morning, so it's might not be on the executive summary sheet.
Okay, yeah, it's not right. So the recommendation now is to approve that and then move the letter grade
For that second appeal factor, correct?
for the second.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. And there will be another opportunity where we go over the full recommendation for the Committee on Monument Valley.
Perfect.
Jessica, just to clarify, for Monument Valley, the recommendation is to approve the second appeal factor. What is the recommendation for the first appeal factor for Monument Valley?
The current recommendation for that first appeal factor is to recommend denial due to those limited attempts to rectify the data during the appropriate window.
Okay, so to clarify, the subcommittee would be voting, when they vote, they will vote to approve a letter grade increase for Monument Valley based only on the second appeal factor. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify.
Correct. Thank you so much, Executive Director Ross. Anything you want to add, Sean Smith? I see your hand up.
Yeah, so just to clarify, appeal factor 2 is for the English learners, correct? The 8 students who were unable to test and finish their assessment, right?
Correct.
So when I modeled it, assuming that all 8 received proficient on both math and ELA, that change did not quite push them by itself. That change would not quite push them over to the next letter grade with those assumptions. So they were just shy, like 0.36 points, I think, away from the following letter grade, just based on appeal factor 2.
Yes, thank you so much, Sean. Usually with the adverse testing conditions, it's really hard when there's limited data to actually model these things on. So we're guessing which students might have been proficient on those adverse testing conditions. So usually if it's on a threshold, the committee's recommended to push it through to that next point, given that there's limited evidence regarding it, but it's on that cusp there as well, and being substantiated with some of their test results that they did have on ACT math for those students. Yes, Dr. Hagerman?
So just to restate, so Sean, are you saying that if we accepted all the data changed in a positive way, it still didn't move the letter grade?
When I ran it, correct. So I looked at all the 8 students who were proficient on Azella, and then I imputed scores for them, saying like, hey, I just assumed that they passed both their ACT math and ACT ELA, and I put them back into the equation as having passed it, which also changed their percent tested. When I look at that, it's still like assuming that every single one of them passed, it's still based on that one factor alone came up short.
Okay, thank you.
But Jessica, just to clarify, I think it was 18 students total that were impacted by the weather. It was the 8 students that were proficient on the EL, but 18 students were impacted by the adverse weather condition.
Correct, that would be true. So we're guessing that at least 8 of those 18 would have been proficient, but there's no way of knowing if it would have been more or less. There have been other adverse testing conditions that the committee discussed on November 20th. that were within that point or so threshold, but it was substantiated that it happened within that testing window. It was something that limited the data that was available to examine the actual impact on the letter grade, which is true for Monument Valley as well.
So, and I don't mean to just repeat what Jessica said it clearly, but just to clarify for anybody who's also watching from home, this would be approved then not on the data piece, as Sean Smith said, but it is an adverse testing condition. And the precedent there from the subcommittee has been if an adverse testing condition did impact the testing window and full data are not available to see the full extent of the impact, then the letter grade improvement was granted. So is that, Jessica, you're okay with that explanation?
Yes, I would
Okay.
be. Mhm. So I'm going to take us back for a moment to Skyview School, if that's okay. As I discussed, with that additional information provided from the Department of Education, the draft recommendation would be recommend approval to be overall letter grade based on incorrect data related to special education inclusion. I'd like to ask now if the committee has a motion in that effect.
I'll make that motion.
In the second,
I second.
I'm going to give it to Dr. Clay. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
And the motion passes 3-0. Thank you so much. I see that Audra Ahumada, the Deputy Associate for Assessment, has her hand up. Any questions?
I just wanted to provide clarification to the committee about the testing windows for ACT. So there are 2 separate testing windows, and we encourage everyone to participate in the first testing window. There are several, I think there's 8 online test window dates and 1 paper date in the first test window. And then we encourage them to use the second test window with those same 8 online days and 1 paper testing day in the second session as makeups, or, if anything were to occur, they've at least, made the opportunity to test the majority of their students during that first test window. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Audra. I'm going to check right now, but I seem to remember that this school used the second testing window. So I'm going to go in and evaluate that supporting documentation that they provided. Okay, thank you for bearing with me for that for a moment. So this specifically was for ELL students that were grouped together to take the ACT by accommodations due to their testing accommodations determined. So could you speak a little bit about what other opportunity the school might have had if they tested on that March 21st on the paper test, and that's what would happen if they needed to maybe take the paper test in another administration, Audra?
So again, if they were a paper-based school, they would have the 1 test day in the first test window. And then for anyone that didn't get tested on that 1 test day in the first test window, they can test them on any of the online test days in that first test window. And if they still didn't get those students, or they didn't want to test them online or couldn't test them online, they had the second test window paper date. And then again, the additional online options in that second test window date. And as far as accommodations, ACT does have a very strict test accommodation request window. We advertise that, starting in August, please get those in early, make every attempt to get them in before their deadline. And their deadline, I believe, was in January. It might have been a little bit earlier last year. It's so many weeks before the first test window for the state.
And what would happen if the students started the test, but were sent home and the test wasn't fully finished, but it was started?
Yes. So if a student started a test, but it wasn't finished, there is a determination that, that can be made at the state level to allow them to use another test window date to have another test option. We've used that, I think, maybe not at all so far, because most of the students were able to test. We weren't made aware that any student wasn't able to test, or at least not to my knowledge. But that is a possibility that if there were additional online test window dates or that second total window, we would allow them to test underneath those options.
Thank you so much. So I do notice that the principal for Monument Valley is available. So I just wanted to wonder if the committee wanted to give them an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the specific appeal factor.
I definitely would like to, if they're here, to hear, give them the opportunity just to, if they have anything to clarify.
Awesome. Principal Dodson, are you available?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Would you be able to speak a little bit more about those students testing with that paper assessment on March 21st, which was a snowstorm day where they were sent home in the middle of testing, and the student population was grouped together due to their testing accommodations? I think some of the questions might be around those students not having the opportunity to test later on. And could you just try to answer it sort of briefly in 5 minutes or less?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so just to clarify, the testing window that we had for those students on March 21st, we had grouped all of those students because of their testing ability. And when we were in our last, I want to say we were in the last portion of the ACT test, the attempt that we made was to have those students stay in the building. However, because of the rural nature of many of the students that we serve, we weren't able to have them stay beyond what we would have considered probably 3:30, which is our normal operating hours. So therefore, the students were dismissed at, I believe it was 2:30, and we had to get them home because of the storm was intensifying, and many of the students we were going to attempt to shuttle home or have parents come in, but again, we felt due to the nature of the storm, that wasn't a safe option. It was really hard to make that determination. However, our test coordinator, who was one of our counselors, that was a group effort, group decision to be made. And we were in the last portion of that test. So because, many of the students didn't finish, when we made attempts to contact ACT, they indicated that the assessment needed to be completed in the operating school hours. And if we kept the students beyond 3:30, that's not within our window of operation. So therefore, those tests wouldn't be considered valid. And we ended up just having the students go home. And it was really hard because, again, those students had taken most of that day to test. And it was just a very unfortunate, unforeseeable event that occurred.
Thank you so much, Principal Dodson. Any questions from the committee?
I have one. So this was, you took the test, you tested students on the last day available for testing. Is that correct?
I believe, yeah, for paper test, the paper test option was what we had selected. This was, I think, done in September or October when we made that determination, only because we had been having issues with online connectivity. And so because this was our first go at ACT testing, we were really trying to get a majority of our students, number one, tested. And then the second thing was having results for a paper-based test were more reliable for us just because of the infrastructure with internet. So once we got ourselves situated with the paper-based option, it just allowed more reliability for what we were going to get back in terms of the results. Because with internet outages and especially that day with a snowstorm, it just made it very unpredictable in terms of what type of data we are going to get from a computer-based assessment. And we're actually continuing to use that option only because of the likelihood of a network crash or something like that, especially within the last, within a testing window. So the communication and coordination that we put into test preparation went into paper-based for that particular day.
Okay, I have one more question. I think I heard in the meeting that anytime something like this happens, that ADE does give opportunity if you let them know that you can retest if a test is not completed. Was that correct, or?
Would you like me to speak to that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so if there was an issue where connectivity went out and they were almost finished with their test, we could cancel out that test and allow them to take another test. Now, because they were taking paper, there's only essentially 2 test dates, one in the first test window, one in the second. They would have to take them online. That would be the only option, but we would allow that. And then just for another piece of clarification, the ACT assessments are timed and there's a specific time limit. And so they are required to finish the test within each of those times. So for example, the reading portion of the test is given in 45 minutes. They have that allotment to do whether it's on paper or online. And so if for a regular test taker, if you add all of that up, all of our tests were finished around noon. But if a student had accommodations with additional time, which I don't know about these specific students, that would require them to go beyond that like noon time administration. But they, like I said, they are timed. And so depending on their accommodation, that's the amount of time that they're required to take the test within.
Thank you.
I'll note real quick that the students in this grouping for the paper-based all had test time accommodations for additional time. Any other questions for Principal Dodson? Okay, I'm hearing none. And again, that one has 2 appeal factors, so we'll return back to that in the future, the meeting. The next appeal that had pending associated with the draft recommendation was Vista High School. Give you a moment to pull that up. This is an alternative school that had submitted the credits earned and on track to graduate from the department. Only the credits earned got included. The on track to graduate was left out for some reason. And so that information was verified of what the point total would be for that on track to graduate. It was 9.4 of the 10 points. And the impact of that would be the recommendation of approval to the B overall letter grade based on that inclusion of the on track to graduate data submitted within that appropriate window. there any questions about Vista High School? Okay. Does the committee have such a motion in that effect for Vista High School?
So moved.
First from Dr. Clay, second from Member Meyerson. All in favor?
Aye.
And the motion passes 3-0. So I'll go back for just a second to those other schools that are pending information. That's Estravo Online Academy, Desert Cove, Desert Shadows, Ellsworth, Larkspur, and Palomino. Does the committee have any questions regarding the pending information, or is it content to wait until a later meeting? Sorry, Audra?
Sorry, I just had some additional information about test windows for the first test window, March 21st. If you want to hear about that now or later on.
Yeah, we can hear about it now for sure.
Okay, so for test window 1, March 21st, that's the standard test paper date. But if a student has an accommodation such as extra time, they're allowed to test March 21st through March 24th and March 27th through March 31st. So paper accommodations have additional test dates as well. In addition to those online dates, which I said, were those 4 online dates. But paper accommodations also have additional test dates.
Thank you, Audra. So as I mentioned earlier, there will be an additional convening of the A to F Appeals Committee to consider a school that does not have recommendation or any school where the weighted information is not available at the time of this committee meeting. The committee may table the draft recommendation on these schools. Therefore, the committee would seek a motion to table items 2B5 through 2B8, 2B12, 2B13, and 2C2. Does the committee have a motion in that regard?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second? Okay. First from Dr. Hagerman, second from Member Meyerson. Any discussion on this? And hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
And the motion carries to table those items as mentioned. So then the committee's final recommendations on these tabled appeal applications would go before this full State Board of Education at the earliest of the January 22nd, 2024 meeting. The schools will be contacted with more information about the next steps on those. So then we are going to move back to the consent agenda format for the meeting. If the committee members have questions, concerns, or any disagreement with the draft recommendation, we would ask that you pull those schools from the consent agenda now for discussion. The committee can discuss today's appeals if they have questions of staff or the Department of Education or wish to hold any discussion among themselves. If it's determined that the committee has any further questions from the school, that item would then potentially be tabled to a future committee meeting to allow the school to address those questions. Additionally, if any member has an appeal application for which they must recuse themselves from the vote for recommendation to the board, they would indicate that now at this time as well. There appeared to be none to me, but I don't know everybody's connections amongst themselves. So then now I will pause and allow the committees to consider if there are any items that they would like to pull for recusal or discussion.
This is Dr. Clay. I would like to pull Aspire High School for discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Clay. At this time, I'd also ask if you want to pull Monument Valley High School because the appeal factor 1 is similar for them as well. The schools both submitted their self-reported CCRI data. However, there were some misunderstandings about what goes into which column of the CCRI and how to complete the CCRI. And so the schools have resubmitted through this appeals process that updated data and information. So Dr. Clay, the floor is yours to talk about Aspire High School.
Well, I would, my issue is that it was self-reported. CCRI was not really, from what I'm hearing, understood. Regardless of how long the person has been in education, usually, for example, I have a school like that, and my principal will have longitudinal data to go back to. But with this particular one, these are type of alternative schools. This is the first time they've been doing this. They don't have that data to go back and look at, hey, did I do it right? Did I do it wrong? Is this how it's supposed to be? There were too many questions. And the thing is, my concern is, does the grade truly reflect the school? That's it. Does the grade truly reflect the school? And if it's because of a mistake, misunderstanding, or not understanding the CCRI, which a lot of you understand, if you don't work with CCRI, okay, you can say, I think I know what that means, and let me put it in, and you put something in wrong. But by that time, it's too late. So that's my concern. And another concern is we need to do more training to our schools on CCRI and what each column represents, especially these schools that are alternative schools or DRPs. We need to make sure they have all the information that they need and that they're trained well so that we won't go through this again. I would like to see the scores reflect what's going on in the schools. That's my biggest concern right now. And it doesn't.
Yeah, Sean, I see your hand up. Sean Smith, if you'd like to go ahead.
I would just like to echo what Dr. Clay said. I agree 100%. I think, as I've thought about these appeals, and talking with the school leaders, the good experiences that we want to incentivize with the CCRI really did happen for those kids. They experienced it, and I think about what grade are we communicating to these communities? Are we telling them like, hey, this is a quality experience you're going to have, your kid's going to have a good experience at this school? Does that message get lost if we're saying like, hey, there was some training that was missed from some adults for a technical aspect? And I do agree, and I'll take full responsibility for, the training on the CCRI. I think that's an area where we want to be better partners on the department. I look at, I'll hold up Audra as an example. She has training that ensures that 95% of kids get tested every single year, regardless of whether there's new people coming in place as district test coordinators. And so we're trying to take some ideas from her as far as how do we guarantee that new people to the system have the training that they need from us. And so, again, I think the way Dr. Clay described it is exactly accurate in terms of what happened at school and what we can do to be more supportive partners on our side at the Department of Education in terms of the training.
Thank you so much. Any other discussion amongst the other committee members?
I guess the only thing I'll add just to kind of reflect what Dr. Clay says is I think the degree to which we can make sure the letter grades represent what kids actually did, the better. And so what I hear her saying is that let's be careful about penalizing students for adult stuff. And so I'm kind of in that same space too.
Thank you so much. So now I'd ask if the committee has a motion for Aspire High School, either to accept the draft recommendation or as presented, or has a different recommendation to present. I'll inform you that with the updated CCRI, the school would move to a C letter grade. Is that correct, Sean Smith?
Let me confirm, but I believe so. Yes.
So does the committee have a motion for Aspire High School?
Jessica,
Mhm.
actually, if I could, you don't mind, we'd want to frame the motion in the affirmative. So we would say, does the committee have a motion to change the grade from based on? So why don't if we can phrase it that way, I think that might be clearer for the committee.
Awesome.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? So if the current recommendation is denial due to no attempts to rectify, does that recommendation still stand from staff despite the fact that the CCRI, had that been included, it would have changed the grade? Just confirming.
I think that hearing what Dr. Clay and Dr. Hagerman said about the students performed those activities, that's what was accurate within that school setting for the school year 22-23, that would be what the appeals process is for, is to then rectify anything that wasn't reflected in that letter grade.
Great.
Yeah, I think we can comfortably say that we would change the recommendation based on that.
Perfect.
Okay, so then does the committee have a motion for Aspire High School to recommend approval to a C overall letter grade based on the inclusion of updated CCRI? The school will then be connected and provided any additional trainings that the department puts together regarding CCRI in the future.
So move.
And I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And the motion carries with that recommendation. So as I said earlier, Monument Valley High School is in a similar situation with their first appeal factor being CCRI data that was corrected. I would like to ask Sean Smith to speak to the conversation that he had with the school and providing them some support and training about CCRI that will help them in the future.
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, similar to kind of what I'd mentioned before, I was able to have a thorough conversation with Principal Dodson and understand what the students were receiving in terms of the work-based learning. It really sounds like everybody was making the attempts to do the best they could on completing it accurately and not over-reporting. And when he was understanding of how that might count and be influenced there, the activities that he described, he mentioned students they're running like an online, a community veterinary day. They'll bring horses in to have their hooves trimmed and spay and neuter clinics for the community. They run basically a school business that raises funds for their CTE programs and stuff. It is the kind of things that we're looking for in terms of real work-based experiences that are taking place in the school day. And, when I was talking to him, he said his initial reluctance was over-reporting something that might not be considered accurate. He's like, hey, we're real meticulous about only the kids that pass those courses with a C or higher, which again, that's not explicitly spelled out in that section, but it is kind of mentioned in some of the other CTE courses. So they were being diligent, I think, in terms of getting a good measurement on students who were receiving those kind of experiences. And again, I think it goes back to how we want to report this back to the communities that they're serving in terms of the experiences that their kids have there. I feel very comfortable that the updated numbers reflect the career and college preparation that they're getting. And again, like Dr. Hagerman said, you don't want to have it be an indication of an adult at the school or district office forgot to put these 6 numbers in a box and so you're not as good at school. So focusing on the student actual experiences, I think it fits within what the CCRI is designed to measure.
Hey, Jessica, can I ask Sean something?
Oh, yes, please go ahead, Dr. Hagerman. Nobody needs to go through me in this case.
Okay, Sean, if we take the first appeal factor, does that change their letter grade already? Or do you need the second one too to make that change?
It sounds, excuse me. Yeah. So the first appeal factor by itself would change the letter grade and increase it to the next letter grade. Yeah.
Okay, so we could, theoretically, we could accept appeal factor 1 and kind of not have to kind of wave into the dilemmas that factor 2 have.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Any further discussion regarding Monument Valley High School's appeal from the committee?
Just as to state my kind of opinion is my proposal would be we accept appeal factor 1 and not, I don't know, sure if we have to deny or what do we do with appeal factor 2, but we just, my preference would be that do we address factor 1 in the affirmative and change the letter grade based on that.
Give me 1 second while I craft the motion for that. Thank you.
I appreciate you doing that instead of me. Thank you.
Okay, so I've crafted this motion based on what Dr. Hagerman said. You are all under your own will to vote as you please. So the draft recommendation that I'll call for the Committee on Monument Valley is recommend approval to B overall letter grade for appeal factor 1 due to the inclusion of the updated CCRI. As I stated earlier, the school will then be provided additional support and guidance and trainings on CCRI if needed in the future, and recommend denial for appeal factor 2 due to limited evidence to substantiate the impact on the overall letter grade. How does that sound? Do I have a motion in that regard?
I'll make that motion.
Any
I'll
second?
second. I'll second.
Any discussion? And all in favor?
Aye.
So I have a 2-1, is that? Sorry, I didn't see Member Meyerson's vote. Oh, sorry about that. 3-0 for recommending approval on appeal factor 1 and denial on appeal factor 2 for Monument Valley High School. Are there any other schools that the committee would like to remove from the consent agenda at this time for additional discussion? Okay. So hearing none, then I will call for a motion to approve items 2A1, 2B1, 2B2, 2B10, 2B11, 2CI, sorry, 2C1, and 2C3, 2C4, and 2C5 as presented. Does the committee have a motion in that regard?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? And I'll keep my head up this time, sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And the motion carries with the recommendations as presented, accepted on those schools mentioned. So then that leaves us with the decisions that were made by the committee today. We'll go to the full State Board of Education for final action on December 4th, 2023. This is for all of those schools that weren't tabled, where a motion for acceptance or denial is voted on today. I'm just going to check real quick that we got everyone. Okay. I think we're good. The committee has approved recommendations to the board for schools on today's agenda or tabling until a later ADAF Appeals Committee meeting. The board will consider those recommendations on December 4th. The committee's final recommendations will be reviewed by the board on January 22nd for those items that are pending additional information. The committee is encouraged to share any questions it may have either in this meeting or over email or in the executive summary sheet about the schools that were tabled today. All schools on today's agenda will be notified of the status of the appeal applications committee recommendation following this meeting with guidance on how to provide a public comment to the board. Once a date for reconvening the ADAF Appeals Committee is determined, this will also be shared with those schools on that agenda. Do I have any other questions about the ADAF Appeals Committee today?
Jessica, just to clarify again for those who may be listening, can we just restate the schools that have been tabled for future meetings, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Executive Director Ross. The schools that were tabled today are Desert Cove Elementary School, Desert Shadows Elementary School, Larkspur Elementary School, Palomino Intermediate School, Ellsworth Elementary School, Estravo Online Academy, Entity ID 91184, and Estravo Online Academy, Entity ID 91246.
And then just to further clarify, we are awaiting further information from either the school and or the department. As we get more information, recommendations will be made. We would convene the subcommittee one more time just for those schools. And then the hope is to have them available for board approval in January.
Correct. Thank you,
Thank you.
Executive Director Ross. Hearing no other questions or comments from the committee will now stand adjourned at 9:58 a.m. until it reconvenes to consider those tabled items. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
See you in December.